Hello Drawing 1 students, welcome to my home studio and our first tutorial video of this semester. Today we're going to be covering blind contour drawing, and hopefully this is the first in a series of videos that become a repository of information for you. Throughout the semester you can look back on Canvas, find these tutorials if you ever have a question, and see how I employ the techniques. So again, today blind contour drawing, the things that I'm going to use: a graphite pencil. Get something soft, 4B, 6B, or 8B out of your kit. You want something where the graphite's going to come off smooth and buttery across your paper, okay? Grab your 18 by 24 paper pad, and I'm going to start by setting up a still life for myself. See you on the other side. To get started, I tape down my paper on my work surface. Here I'm just using the masking tape that comes with the kit. I sharpen my pencil, making sure that I've got a pencil that's nice and soft. Here I'm using an 8B ebony pencil. So what is contour drawing? Contour drawing is basically using line to follow the edges of whatever form is in front of us, be it a still life, a figure, or really anything in between. But we have to get a little more specific. If we're talking about tracing the outlines of an object using our eyes and our pencil, it's not just the outline of the exterior of the object. We have to get in touch with the interior contours of each object. So, as an example of what not to do, or a common mistake in contour drawing, here I am going around the outside of the form of my hand. I'm not touching any of those interesting interior contours. And you'll notice that as I progress, really there's no three-dimensional volume developing in this drawing. It's something rather boring and flat. When you ignore those interior contours, really you're just making an outline. You're not contour drawing yet. Now let's compare that with what we really mean by contour drawing. I'm going to use my hand in the same pose again. And this time, I'm going to use the interior contours. I'm going to let my eye follow along each interior contour on my hand. You can see me tracing around the corner of my thumb there. Look at the pencil tip as it follows those little inlets towards the center of my hand. Here, I'm wrapping around the inside of my palm, coming up the middle, and really finding all those folds in the palm of my hand and up the back of my fingers. Now, sometimes there are no interior contours, but when they're present, it's best to handle them now, especially as we move into blind contour. Now, blind contour is the process of doing this exact same thing, and if you can believe it, this is actually me working in blind contour. I'm trying not to put my eyes on my drawing, but only keep my eyes on the surface and edges of my hand. Now, that may seem like a little bit of a reach, but I've drawn my hand in blind contour a lot. It's a form that I'm pretty used to, and wrapping around my fingers or sort of the folds in the palm of my hand are very familiar shapes to me, and so I'm not having too much trouble keeping my eyes on them and really being faithful to them. However, when I set up my still life later, we're going to get into some of the nitty-gritty of how a blind contour drawing, it's very difficult for it to stay all in proportion and look appropriate when it's done. And that's actually great. That's part of the process, because what blind contour drawing is about is the process of seeing. The drawing is almost a leftover from the act of really seeing something. It's about using your eyes to see how something is formed, how something is constructed, and at the same time, in a very Zen sort of way, not wanting anything from it. You don't have to care about the cool drawing that you get afterwards, because 9 times out of 10, it's probably going to be pretty messy, and it's not a finished product. It's practice. Now, to circle back on this technique, I'm writing myself some notes. On the left side, we have a very common mistake with contour drawing and blind contour drawing. We don't want you to provide a basic outline. You can, put your hand down on a piece of paper and trace around it with your pencil like those little Thanksgiving turkeys, but it's not contour drawing, that's outline. On the right side, we have a true contour drawing, in this case a blind contour drawing. On the left side, you can see my notes. It's flat and it's boring. But on the right, you get a real sense of depth, and you can see that I've what we call modulated my pencil weight. I'm pushing more or pushing less based on that particular area of information. We will talk about pencil modulation and medium modulation pretty frequently, and really that just means a change in pressure so we get darker marks or lighter marks. And you can see how darker marks really benefit harder edges or darker creases, and those softer marks are great for tiny little details, just like those, very small or subtle folds in the middle of my palm. So let's go more into detail about blind contour. Blind contour is what we're going to be working on this first week of class. Now, the technique itself is thought to be implemented by Kaiman Nicolaides back in the 60s. He's an artist and instructor who really identified that it was a great way to get students to focus on the things in front of them rather than focusing on their drawing being something of merit. That way, the drawing gets out of your way, and instead you can focus on seeing what the object in front of you has to reveal about itself. So with the idea of drawing in blind contour, I select a still life for myself. I've got a seemingly simple object here, this dozen eggs with their egg crate. I'm going to show you my process for how I do them in blind contour. As I'm getting started, the important thing to remember is this. I'm keeping my eyes on the egg crate and the eggs, and I'm not looking down at my paper. The sensation of staring at an object and following its contours with your eyes can be really unusual and kind of uncomfortable. If you need to place a top sheet of paper over your hand as you draw, that's absolutely okay. It can keep you from the temptation of wanting to look down. So along each contour of that egg crate, along each egg, anytime that there's a fold that's visible, like where two edges come together, that's what I'm talking about. If I knew how to use Adobe After Effects, I would totally, trace over that image for you. I don't really, so I'm just going to try to explain it as many ways as possible. So as I follow this first egg around, I'm noticing there's obviously no interior contour information. I am wondering to myself at this moment, should I make some of the lines darker? Should I make some of them lighter? But at the moment, I'm not too worried. Let's just go ahead and get through this video and we'll see how things turn out. So I'm just going to leave this part silent. You guys go ahead and chill out and watch. Okay, let's talk about some key takeaways here. So this was a blind contour drawing, and here I am. I'm raising my hands like that to explain why everything wound up a little vertically stretched. That's a really common thing to happen in blind contour, where just as human beings, really, for some reason, we have a tendency to sort of elongate the vertical axis, and it often comes down to our drawing position. My board was flat here on a table, and I was explaining there, if you raise it up to be a little bit more at an angle, that can really help with that. Now, the next thing I'm talking about here is the difference between contour and surface value. So I drew that little shadow under that egg to explain. In contour drawing, we're not looking for shading or shadows. That egg did have that perfect cast shadow underneath it, but that's not something that we need to worry about in contour drawing. Now, one of the other things we need to discuss is the proportion here. You can see in blind contour where I've had, the egg crate pass through the eggs, obviously because I'm not looking down at my paper to align them perfectly. And, there are some things that we might consider errors here. And, when you first put your pencil on paper to do this, you're going to have a ton of those. If we're drawing a portrait, you might have someone's eye in the right place on the left side of their face and someone's eye in their forehead, and maybe their forehead is 2 inches wide and their jaw is 5 inches wide, and those sorts of things will happen. That's okay. So that about sums it up for this drawing. I decide that I'm going to move on, and I'm going to set up a larger still life. This is the still life I set up. It was a bunch of food I had laying around the house, as well as a few kitchenwares. You can tell I was feeling kind of hungry at the moment. So here I am, again, drawing in blind contour. Now, this is a much more complex object or series of objects in front of me. So you're going to see, as I move forward, how things get jumbled and out of proportion and out of scale, and that's okay. I'm starting here on that head of garlic on that rotating tray. And you'll see my pencil come down around those sort of circular or oval-like cloves. Now, there is something for me to say here. If you notice my pencil movements here, they're a little bit more erratic than they were with the eggs. That's because the eggs were, long, smooth contours. The thing that I want you guys to shoot for with contour drawing and blind contour drawing is long, smooth contours. Not just in the objects you pick, but in the way that you move your pencil. One really common drawing mistake, especially in contour drawing or with beginning artists, is that you'll see them scratching their pencil back and forth and back and forth and back and forth until they get, just the right curve. And all of a sudden you wind up with something that's really rather undefined and, if you will, kind of scratchy in texture. Let's put that behind us. It's a thing that we're going to have to practice out, because I know when I was younger and I was learning drawing for the first time, that was my MO. I did it all the time because I didn't have confidence that the first mark that I put down was going to be the right one. In contour drawing, it's all about practicing the confidence in those strokes, because you're not worried about what's on your paper. You're just following the long, straight contours of your object. Here I am following around those circular edges of that bamboo steamer basket. Now, these are pretty challenging shapes because obviously I'm not looking at my paper, so you'll see those lines aren't exactly parallel, but that's okay. In blind contour, we're looking for a fidelity of following the object and really seeing it. I actually learned something about my bamboo steamer, and it was that, wow, every time I use it, I burn it a little bit more. Maybe I'm using it the wrong way. An observation like that, while it doesn't really have anything to do with the drawing itself, is kind of interesting. So one of my favorite stories about blind contour is an early artist who had come across Kaiman Nicolaides' book that he published on teaching beginning drawing students. This artist's name was Frederick Frank, and he went on this absolute kick with blind contour drawing. He drew things from his life that he had never really meditated on before. He, just started with his garden. He drew a head of cabbage. He drew a tomato. He drew, I think it was a large rosemary plant. And he was fascinated that he had never really studied these objects because he'd been keeping that garden for over 20 years. And then he moved on to people that he loved. He drew his wife in blind contour, and he was very emotional about that experience because he realized he had never in his, I want to say he'd been married. They'd been married for over 50 years. He'd never sat down and really looked at his partner for that long before, and he learned new things about her face from that drawing session that he wouldn't have. And that's what I really love about blind contour. It's this way of seeing and drawing without judging what's coming out of your hands. And, there's really no descriptors to it. It's not good. It's not bad, because it's not about the drawing. It's about the person or the thing in front of you. Now, I haven't looked down yet, and I'm moving on to that form of the ceramic pitcher. You can see me just rounding the spout there, and I'm following that top contour where the opening is on that ceramic pitcher. I'm following it around. Now, of course, you can see me get off track here. Honestly, the look of this when it's done, I really love it. Here I am approaching the handle. You can see how the handle's almost inside the form of the pitcher here. But we're going to go with it. Here's where the handle attaches to the body of that ceramic piece. And I'm coming up and around, and look how thick that handle is. It's great. So when you're looking at a blind contour drawing like this, at the end, it's so easy to be judgmental of it and say, it's so out of proportion. Obviously, that doesn't go there. What were you thinking? But really, it's an exercise in not thinking. And I think there's so much beauty in that. We'll fast forward a bit, and I'm just going to kind of bop through the rest of the footage I've got of this video. It doesn't need to be this long for you guys to get the idea of it. But you can see me doing some good things here, taking my drawing to the edge of the paper and running off the edge. That's something I'll encourage for each of you as you do this, because ultimately you shouldn't be looking down at the paper. You can see before it's over, I actually make several marks on the wood around the edges of my paper. Here I'm moving on to that bamboo caning on the top of my steamer basket. Now, moments like these in blind contour or in contour drawing at all are really special because you get to contrast really fine details with the long swoopy lines of the whole process. Later on in the drawing, I move to that wax candle on the left side of my still life. I follow that all the way to the top. And I think there's some interesting moments in here when I captured that, the falling wax beads that are a little bit of a different kind of contour than I've done so far in this one, both interior and exterior here. You can see me not matching quite up with the base, but that's a-okay. And with those lines, that about wraps up this first still life of mine in blind contour. We've got three interesting examples, both very different, the hands, the eggs, and this very complicated still life. Here I'm pointing out some things that I think I did either really well or really bizarrely. But again, things lining up is not super critical. We want the experience of seeing the objects, just like this garlic that I'm pointing out. I really captured some of those cloves, and I'm very proud of that steamer basket lid, even though things don't line up.